Hello and welcome back to our podcast, Healing Our Community with Dr. Ray and Jean. Hi, I am Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean.
And on today's episode, we're talking about 4 styles of communication. Yes. And we've talked about this before on our other podcast, our previous podcast called Couple Synergy. And we've talked about this many times in workshops before. We've talked about this with our clients. It is pretty important for people to understand these 4 styles of communication because we do it all the time. And it affects our relationships and everything. Jean's not feeling really good today. Yeah, she kind of pinched a nerve in her neck. Not good. How's everybody doing out there? We do have our Costa Rica mugs here, though. All right. Well, let's. Oh, look at that. Oh, and just as a reminder, this is a live podcast. So if you have any questions or any comments, put that on the Facebook page. If you're watching this through Facebook, you could also put the comments on YouTube if you're watching through YouTube as well. So without further ado, let's jump into communication styles. So communication styles, there's 4 of them. 4 communication styles. There is I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'm going to zoom it in for our sake. There's 4 communication styles. There's passive, there's aggressive, there's passive aggressive, and then there's assertive communication. So as we go through this, we'll talk a little bit about some examples about passive aggressive, and assertive communication. We'll start with passive first. Passive communication style, you would think of this as a person that just says yes all the time. They're a person that just agrees. They avoid conflict. They keep their feelings and their thoughts to themselves. They don't have very, high self-esteem. They have low self-esteem and low confidence because they don't have the confidence to be able to say what they think and they feel. Just think of this as someone who just kind of acquiesces, to another person.
It's very fear-based.
There's fear-based. There's a fear of conflict, fear of upsetting people, fear of, getting in trouble, or fear of judgment from other people. They don't want to let people down. They don't have any boundaries because of that. They're not able to say no, especially when it's something that they don't want. They will say yes because of that fear.
And interestingly, people who use passive communication style often are filled with resentment because their needs don't get met because nobody knows what their needs are, including them.
Yeah. There is no self-respect, and this is indirect communication. So, they are they're kind of going around the point because they're afraid of actually stating the point, right? So it's indirect. They're considered indirect communication. They don't have self-respect because they're not, respecting their own boundaries
or the other person,
or the other person's boundaries as well. And they give their power away, by not being able to say no, by being a people pleaser. That's a really good, description of someone who's passive communicator is that they give their power away to someone else and they're people pleasing.
Very confusing. Interestingly, there's appropriate times to use passive communication.
Yeah.
So it's appropriate to be passive if you're in a position with somebody who's in authority over you, a boss, or maybe if you get pulled over by the police or something, it's probably a good idea to be more passive and more cooperative than to put yourself out there. It's also a good idea to be passive if there's a potential threat And by being passive, you could protect yourself from getting hurt.
Yeah, someone's, robbing you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to, at gunpoint, you're going to be passive and you're going to give over your wallet or whatever, so that you could survive. So that makes a lot of sense to be passive in those cases. Aggressive communication. So an aggressive communicator, this is a person that is combative. They like conflict. They say no, right? Sometimes they say no just out of spite, right? They impose their thoughts and feelings on other people. So they are, we did the episode on power versus force. This would be a person who uses force in the way that they communicate with other people. They do not have high self-esteem. They have low self-esteem.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that someone who is aggressive in the way that they communicate, that they have like this high confidence and high self-esteem because they say it as they feel it and as they think it. But that's not true. It's a perceived confidence, right? People perceive them to be full of power and to be confident in what they're saying, but really they're not speaking what they think and feel. It's a very indirect kind of form of communication. They're being forceful, they're being aggressive, they're being controlling of other people, but they're not really communicating what they're truly feeling on the inside, which might be fear, it might be embarrassment, it might be powerlessness. So these are very vulnerable feelings that the aggressiveness comes in as a coping mechanism to be able to take back their power because they are feeling like their power is being taken away.
This could look like yelling and name calling, but it could also look very
pointing.
Yeah, it can. If someone's very calm and aggressive, that's kind of scary when you're around someone like that, right? Mm. So it's very confusing because they're upset about something, but you don't know really what it is, which is why it's indirect communication, and you really don't know what you're supposed to do because the whole point isn't for you to do anything. The whole point is for them to control the situation or you, and just by getting you off balance, thinking, "What did I do wrong?" or "What should I do different?" They've got your power. They've taken from you some of your energy, and that's all they really wanted. It was never about trying to have a real conversation.
And so because they're taking their power or taking your power away, they don't respect boundaries. They're not respecting the boundaries of other people. They are actually, in fact, crossing boundaries to try to control.
If you're ever in a group and someone in the group is aggressive, they're taking up all the energy in the group. I remember we were in Ireland, and someone said to us that we were quiet Americans.
Oh yeah.
And they had this perception that when Americans were visiting, they would come into the pub or wherever they were, and they'd be really loud, and everyone would overhear their conversation. It's actually an aggressive form of communication to do that, to try to impose your world onto everybody else.
Yes. But we are very quiet Americans.
And aggressive communication actually leads to isolation because people just want to get away from you. Even if you feel like you're in control in that moment, as soon as you are out of that control, that person wants to stay away from you.
And aggressive communication is also a coping mechanism, right? So they're using that aggressiveness and that anger and that controlling perspective so that they can control everything outside of themselves, right? It's protective in nature. The third communication style is called passive aggression or passive aggressiveness.
This is the number one used style.
Number one
used
style. Yeah, especially on online.
Oh yeah.
If any of you are watching this through some of the Facebook community groups, you know what I'm talking about. And passive aggressiveness is a way to assert your control, but in a roundabout way because you don't have the confidence to be able to actually speak up and say what you really think and feel. It is a very common form of communication online because there is this veil, my hand's over here, veil of anonymity, right? It protects you from saying this to someone's face.
Well, no one can respond immediately back to you.
Yeah.
So you have that moment. But it's a very confusing form of communication because people know something's up, but they don't know what is up. So it's a very indirect. Again, it's low self-esteem. There's no boundaries, and people get hurt a lot using this style when you're on the receiving end of it, and it's so confusing. Like, I think I've talked about this before, that one of our clients, he put mushrooms in the spaghetti sauce.
Oh yeah.
And his wife was allergic to mushrooms.
See, I see that as aggressive. That's not even passive aggressive. Like, if she's allergic to mushrooms and he's putting it in the spaghetti sauce intentionally.
So like putting the garbage bag in front of the door, so you have to trip over to get out the door, but not actually saying, "Can you take out the garbage?"
Yeah.
Got it.
That would be. So this is a form of communication style that's very, very common amongst teenagers.
Yes.
Teenagers are very passive aggressive. Now, they'll like roll their eyes, they'll like huff and puff, they'll might
agree
say,
with you to your face,
yeah,
but the rest of their body language
they'll
is
say,
not.
yeah, fine. Okay, fine. Right. So that's a very passive aggressive way of communication. They'll say yes, but really they mean no. Yes, I'll clean my room, but then they'll take like 3 days to do it, and not follow through. It's a form of low self-esteem, low confidence. There are no boundaries. You're not respecting your own boundaries. You're not respecting the boundaries of other people that you're communicating with. It is indirect. You're not communicating exactly what you feel and think, which would be, no, I do not want to do that. I am not going to do that.
I'm not going to clean my room.
I'm not going to do it, right? Just saying no, that's very, it can be very assertive. It's very direct. But when you say yes, you really mean no. You show up 10 minutes late when you say that you're going to be there. That is passive aggressive communication. As I said, there's no self-respect, no respect for other people. And you give your power away initially by saying yes when you really mean no. And then you take it back in a very sneaky way.
Yeah.
Like a roundabout way. Yeah. And as Jean said, this is the most common form of communication, right? You know what? We should kind of double back and say, when would it be appropriate to be aggressive in your communication?
I think if someone's trying to hurt your child,
someone's trying to hurt
yourself,
you,
and it's safe enough for you to be aggressive to get out of that situation.
Yeah, it's appropriate to be aggressive in sports. Yeah, you have to be aggressive in order to win, and
aggressive, be aggressive, BEAGG. When's it appropriate to be passive aggressive?
Well, if you're dealing with a telemarketer or salesperson, you'll say, "Oh yeah, just why don't you send that to me in mail or email or something? I'll take a look at it. Give me a call in a couple of weeks. I can't talk right now." So you're kind of skirting the issue, not being direct with it, and being passive aggressive.
So all those three forms of communication that we already talked about, are almost completely ineffective. They don't really communicate anything. And so the one that works the best,
ineffective in personal relationships.
And actually, I'm communicating something to you and you're receiving it. It doesn't work. So the one that does work very well is assertive. And this is the hardest one to do, even though it works very well.
Because it doesn't come naturally. It's something that you have to learn how to do.
And it requires vulnerability.
Right. And, of those other three, passive aggressive, they're all on the same continuum. Assertive is completely on its own. So
So
what
you'll
is
notice it's the opposite of everything. It requires self-esteem. It requires direct communication and respecting both people. And it's very clear. And so it's very effective.
You will say yes when you mean yes. You'll say
Mhm.
no when you mean no. You are going to be respectful of the other person's opinions and thoughts. You're not disrespectful of that, but you're also being respectful of your own thoughts and feelings as well. So you might say something like, you know, I can understand your position. I hear what you're saying, but however, this is how I feel. Right. And you're being
Yeah.
clear about that.
If you're ever making excuses, then you're not in assertive communication. So if someone
Right.
says, you know, I'm having some people over Saturday night at 5 o'clock, can you come? And you say, oh, well, my kid has to go to the soccer game, or I got this. They'll instantly start working on your excuses, and they'll be like, oh, you can just come later, or maybe somebody else could take them and you could come over. And instead, if you said something that was more like, thank you so much for inviting me, I really appreciate that. I'm sorry I'm not able to make it.
Yeah, very clear.
That's clear as assertive.
Very direct.
And all those excuse things we try to do, those are in those passive forms of communication.
Right. Either passive aggressive or passive. So as you mentioned, it's direct. It's also, you know, you're showing respect for the other people, the other person, and also you're showing respect for yourself, and it's very empowering. One thing that is in here says it respects boundaries. That's one of the most clear elements of assertive communication. Doesn't exist in all the other three, is that you set boundaries in the way that you speak and communicate. So for example, you know, if you're asking a friend to show up at a certain time, and they don't show up, you know, you really needed them to be there. You counted on them to be there. They said that they were going to be there, and then they don't show up. The next time that you see them, you would be very clear in your communication and say, you know, I don't know what happened, but, you know, I really counted on you being there, and it really hurt my feelings or made me feel let down. Okay, so you're communicating your feelings and your thoughts. You're not being confrontational, meaning that you're not accusatory. You're not judging the other person by what they did. But then you're also going to be setting a boundary and say that, you know, I really counted on you being there, and when you didn't show up, it really, you know, made me feel let down. So in the future, if I need someone to be there for me, you know, and this were to happen again, I probably won't call on you, you know, or I probably won't count on you, you know. And so that's what you can expect from me. It's setting the boundary. The boundary you're setting is not an expectation of the other person and their behavior. You're not asking them to change their behavior, letting them know how the behavior impacted you. And then you're also setting the boundary for yourself and saying that if this happens again, this is what you can expect from me. So this is what I am going to hold myself to. So you see how assertive communication is really about taking personal responsibility for your choices, your behaviors, your reactions to other people, and you're not putting any expectations on the other person.
You're not saying you can't do this to me.
Yeah.
Because they can. What you're saying is, if you do this, this is what you can expect from me, and you're in control of that whole situation. I knew a group of people that would go out and hang out together, and if it was like this one woman and you wanted to hang out with her by yourself, she would always be an hour late. So they never made those type of commitments. They always made sure there was 3 or 4 of them, so that if this woman shows up an hour later, they weren't sitting there by themselves.
Yeah. And they probably let that woman know too, that that's what they were going to do. I mean, that would be the element of assertive communication that would be really important.
Yeah. So I asked Ray an interesting question. What form of communication does AI use?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I asked AI to answer that question, and AI in fact said, well, here, what did it say? I got to get to it here. Oh, that's a fascinating meta question. But it said that AI is an ultimate assertive communicator, but it can also drift into passive communication.
Uh-huh.
So it's the gold standard of assertiveness because it uses I statements. It says, I am AI, I cannot fulfill that, I don't have that information. And it focuses on bridge building, all right, to kind of help you find a solution. And it shares facts and insights without the force of needing to be right. Okay.
Because it's not human.
Because it doesn't have emotion and it doesn't have ego. So because AI is built to be a helpful assistant, though, it can also then fall into and slip into passive communication, because that's times where if it makes a mistake, it will over apologize. It will avoid conflict. So if someone is being aggressive with
if you
AI,
want to be right, you can talk to your phone.
Talk to AI. It will absolutely.
But it won't work with another person.
So
I'm timing out.
But if you're not, I know you're in pain. So it can be aggressive. It doesn't push back if you're being aggressive with it, and then it's also subservient because it's in that way it prioritizes you. So it is a passive communicator in that way. So it's very, very interesting to think about those communication styles and how AI fits into it. Well, we want to thank you for joining us today on our podcast about the 4 styles of communication. If you have any questions or comments in the future, please let us know. Oh, look,
thanks, Deborah.
Deborah just said, "Hope you feel better soon."
Me too.
I know you look like in pain. And how can someone move from passive communication to assertive communication? It's just not keeping your thoughts and feelings to yourself and being assertive in the way that you communicate.
Well, interestingly, AI could help with that. Right?
That's true.
Because if you ask AI how to say something, it's only going to tell you like
an assertive way to
That's
say
respectful.
it. Yeah. So it can be a tool. We can use it as a tool. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. Remember, every Wednesday at 12:15, we'll be live, but you can catch previous episodes on our YouTube channel, KBH Center. It has all the podcast episodes there. And let's.
You don't got it.
This podcast is about opening up the conversation about mental health in Delta County. And it's only in opening up the communication that we can enact change. So Delta, join us next time. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you.